My neighbor's cucumber plant has basically swallowed half her fence by now. She waters it when she remembers, and some weeks that's maybe twice tops. I don't think she's fed that plant anything since sometime around June, honestly. And she's still hauling in cucumbers every few days, like it's nothing. Meanwhile, I've got a friend who goes out every single morning, checks the plant, reads every article he can find, and somehow ends up with cucumbers that taste bitter half the time or curve like a comma. I used to think that was just bad luck. Some people get it, some people don't, but it's really not that. There are a few specific things about how cucumbers grow that barely anyone explains properly, and once those click, the whole plant stops feeling unpredictable. I'm going through 5 of them today. Number 4 is the one that got me, because a cucumber plant can go from totally fine to collapsed overnight, and the reason isn't what most people assume. Let's start with something really basic that almost nobody sets up on purpose. Number 1 is getting the vine up off the dirt. If you leave a cucumber plant alone, it just sprawls. That's what it wants to do naturally. The problem is the leaves end up sitting right against damp soil, and after you water or after it rains, those leaves stay wet way longer than they should. That moisture sitting there is basically an open door for powdery mildew. You've probably seen it without knowing the name for it. That grayish white dust that shows up on the leaves sometime around midsummer. Once it starts, it spreads fast, and a plant fighting mildew can't really photosynthesize the way it needs to, so the harvest drops off, even while the plant is technically still alive and green, setting up something for it to climb. A trellis, an old cage, even just some string tied between 2 stakes, fixes most of this on its own. Air actually moves through the leaves instead of sitting stagnant underneath them. They dry faster. And weirdly enough, the cucumbers themselves come out straighter when they're hanging in the air, instead of resting flat on the ground, getting sunburned on one side. Setting this up takes maybe 15 or 20 minutes at planting time. That's it, and it saves you a mildew problem that usually shows up right when you're least expecting it. Number 2 is watering with a lot more attention than feels reasonable. A cucumber is something like 95% water once it's grown. I didn't think much of that number until someone pointed out what it actually means for the plant. There's barely any buffer if your watering is inconsistent, because the fruit is almost entirely made of the stuff. Tomatoes have more flesh and structure, so they can absorb a little stress without falling apart. Cucumbers really can't do that, so when the soil swings from soaked to bone dry over and over, you tend to run into 2 separate problems, and sometimes you get hit with both at once. The first is bitterness, and that comes down to compounds called cucurbitacins. They're always present in the plant at some low level, but heat combined with uneven watering pushes the plant to make more of them, especially close to the skin and near the stem end. That's the actual explanation for why a cucumber can taste perfectly fine one week and then bitter the next, even off the exact same vine. The second issue is shape. Curved cucumbers, ones pinched weirdly in the middle, bulging at one end, that almost always traces back to growth, getting interrupted somewhere along the way and never quite catching back up. The fix here isn't complicated at all. It just takes consistency, which honestly is harder than it sounds when life gets busy. About an inch of water a week is the general target. More if you're dealing with a heat wave. Mulch around the base helps too. Straw works, shredded leaves work. Whatever you've got, it just slows down how fast the soil dries between waterings. Number 3 is picking way more often than seems necessary. This one surprised me the most out of everything I've learned about growing these. A cucumber plant isn't putting out fruit to be nice to you. Its whole biological purpose is making seeds and being done with the job. Once a cucumber sits on the vine long enough to start yellowing and swelling up with mature seeds inside, the plant treats that as finished. It sends signals through the rest of the vine that slow down new flower production because as far as the plant's concerned, it already succeeded at what it set out to do. So one forgotten cucumber, hiding under some leaves near the bottom where you never look, can quietly shut down the whole plant's output while you're standing there confused about why the flowers keep dropping without turning into anything. Picking every couple of days and taking the fruit a little smaller than you'd probably want to keeps tricking the plant into thinking there's still more work ahead. I've noticed gardens where someone actually checks the vines regularly just produce more overall than the ones where everybody assumes somebody else already looked. Number 4 is that total. Sudden wilting doesn't always mean the plant is finished. You go outside one morning and the entire vine is just flat. Not a couple droopy leaves here and there, the whole plant collapsed with no warning signs the day before. A lot of people rip it out right then, assuming something rotted overnight. Sometimes that instinct is right. There's a bacterial disease called bacterial wilt that clogs up the plant's internal water tubes, and it genuinely causes this kind of sudden full collapse. What most people don't realize, though, is that this disease almost never shows up on its own. Cucumber beetles carry it, those small yellow or spotted beetles that show up earlier in the season, crawling around the leaves before you've even thought about them as a problem. They pick up the bacteria and pass it into the plant while they're feeding, and once that bacteria is inside the plant's vascular system, there's really no coming back from it. Pulling the plant out fast matters at that point, because the beetles can spread it over to your other vines next. There's a quick way to check before assuming the worst though. Cut through the base of the main stem, right near the soil line, touch a knife to the cut, and slowly pull it away. If a thick, sticky whitish thread stretches out between the two pieces, that confirms bacterial wilt. If the inside just looks clean, green, normal, no stringiness at all, the collapse was probably heat stress, or a dry spell that hit right as temperatures spiked. That kind of plant usually stands back up within a day, especially if you give it a deep soak in some shade during the hottest stretch of the afternoon. Putting row covers over young seedlings early in the season keeps the beetles off before they get a chance to spread anything at all, and it won't hurt the plant since it doesn't need pollinators visiting quite yet at that early stage anyway. Number 5 is not panicking when the first flowers don't turn into anything. Cucumber plants grow two kinds of flowers on the same vine, male and female. Once you know what to look for, telling them apart is easy. Female flowers have a small swollen bump right behind the petals, basically a baby cucumber waiting on pollination. Male flowers just sit on a plain thin stem with nothing behind them at all. Here's what throws people off, and it threw me off too the first year I grew these. Most varieties open almost entirely male flowers for the first week or two of blooming, sometimes even longer than that. Those flowers look completely healthy. Bees show up for them just fine, and then they fall off without becoming anything, because there's no female flower around yet for them to actually pollinate. People see that happening and assume the plant is broken somehow. Some people even pull a perfectly healthy vine over it, thinking it's a lost cause. It's really just how the plant starts out. Female flowers show up more as the plant matures, and the ratio shifts on its own without you doing a single thing. Once female flowers do appear, pollination still has to happen within a pretty tight window, usually just one morning per flower before it closes up. If you notice tiny cucumbers starting to form and then shriveling at the tip before they get anywhere, that's usually a pollination miss rather than any kind of disease. Planting a few flowers nearby that pull in bees can help with this a lot, or you can hand pollinate with a small paintbrush, moving pollen from a male flower over to a female one, especially if your yard just doesn't see much pollinator activity on its own. Put those 5 together and you're really doing one connected thing across the whole season, getting the vine up so light and air can reach it properly. Keeping the water steady enough that the fruit doesn't turn bitter or come out lopsided, picking constantly so the plant keeps thinking there's more work to finish, checking the stem before writing off a wilted plant as dead, and giving the flowering sequence enough time to sort itself out instead of judging the plant during that early stretch where it's mostly just opening male flowers. If any of this cleared something up that you've been wondering about with your own plants, go ahead and subscribe, because that's basically what this channel does every week, taking the vague advice everyone repeats and actually explaining what's happening underneath it. Tell me in the comments if a cucumber's ever wilted on you like that overnight, and whether it turned out to be the bacterial thing or just heat catching up to it, or if you're dealing with the opposite problem, a vine loaded with flowers and nothing to show for it yet. I read through these comments, and they genuinely shape what I cover next. Go check under a few leaves for one you might have missed. I'll see you in the next one.